The Shinn formula, creating wealth through faith and alignment, is essentially a bridge between spiritual laws, psychological conditioning, and practical behavior. And if we distill it deeply, we discover that wealth, prosperity, and abundance are not merely external financial outcomes, but the natural byproduct of a person's internal state, belief system, spoken word, emotional alignment, and trust in a higher source. And this is where Florence Scovel Shinn's work becomes incredibly relevant, even in modern times, because she emphasized that the world we live in is not a world of pure logic or pure luck, but a world of laws that respond to faith, words, energy, and assumptions. And according to her, if a person is not working with these laws, they are unconsciously working against them, blocking their own flow, limiting their own receiving, and creating experiences of scarcity, frustration, and stagnation. Not because wealth is unavailable, but because the individual is not aligned with it on an inner level. And this concept may sound mystical at first, but when observed through psychology and behavioral science, it becomes clearer. A person's inner assumptions always leak out into their behavior, their decisions, their confidence, their tone, and ultimately their results. So a person who privately believes money is hard will behave in hesitation, fear, and contraction, will avoid opportunities, will underprice themselves, will undersell their skills, will accept unfair treatment, will stay silent where they should speak, and will sabotage profitable paths even when they appear. And on the other hand, a person who has a deep inner assumption that wealth is natural, opportunities are abundant, their skills are worthy, and their source is infinite, will talk differently, decide differently, negotiate differently, work differently, invest differently, and therefore produce different results. And this difference in belief is exactly what Shinn meant by faith, because for her, faith is not blind hope, nor passive wishing or religious rhetoric, but a psychological and spiritual alignment with abundance that expresses itself in confidence, clarity, disciplined speech, and the refusal to fear circumstances. And when fear dissolves, panic dissolves with it. And when panic dissolves, wisdom rises. And wisdom is the foundation of strategic action, which is why Shinn insisted that action without faith is weak, and faith without action is incomplete, because the formula for wealth contains both, belief and behavior, synchronizing into alignment. And alignment is the key word here, because most people do not lack talent, skill, ideas, or opportunity. They lack alignment between their internal posture and their external goals. For example, a person may desire wealth but internally believe that money corrupts, rich people are greedy, I don't deserve more, life is hard, I'm unlucky, my family never had money, my background limits me, and so on. And these beliefs are not harmless, they are instructions to the subconscious mind, and the subconscious obeys by filtering perception, shaping emotional response, and influencing decision-making in ways that maintain that belief, which explains why many people can work hard for years yet never break into prosperity. They are acting externally but blocked internally. And Shinn would say, until the inner law changes, the outer cannot shift, and the inner law changes through spoken word, through faith, through trust in divine supply, through gratitude, through forgiveness, and through dissolving fear. And yes, such language can sound outdated to modern rational minds, but the truth is, modern psychology says the same thing in different packaging. Cognitive beliefs shape perception, perception shapes behavior, behavior shapes outcome, and outcome reinforces belief, forming a self-repeating loop. And the only way to break a loop is to interrupt belief and speech, which is exactly why Shinn placed enormous power in the spoken word, because the spoken word is not just communication, it is self-programming, emotional coding, reality alignment, and subconscious suggestion. And if a person constantly speaks lack, I can't afford it, there's never enough, everything is expensive, money slips away, I'm always struggling, they are affirming commands of scarcity to the subconscious, which will then find ways to confirm them. And if a person speaks abundance, money comes in expected and unexpected ways. I am provided for, opportunities flow to me, my wealth blesses others, the supply is infinite, my skills create value. They are reprogramming themselves toward receptivity, confidence, and alignment, and such alignment gradually manifests in behavior that attracts wealth. And Shinn teaches that alignment is not achieved by forcing reality to change, but by changing your vibrational stance, your assumption of how the world works. And once the assumption changes, behavior shifts automatically, because the human mind always behaves according to what it assumes to be true. For example, if a person assumes they are worthy of money, they will charge fairly, ask boldly, negotiate confidently, network intentionally, take risks, say no to low-value exchanges, learn valuable skills, and position themselves with authority, whereas someone who assumes the opposite will do the opposite, even if both wish to be wealthy externally. And this is why Shinn says that desire alone does not produce wealth, alignment does, because desire without alignment becomes frustration, and frustration becomes resentment, and resentment becomes bitterness, and bitterness destroys receptivity, while aligned desire becomes inspiration, and inspiration becomes movement, and movement becomes creation, and creation produces wealth. And this flow is what Shinn calls the law of supply, meaning supply comes to those who are open, aligned, and not afraid, because fear blocks supply, and fear in Shinn's framework is not enemy in itself, but a signal that belief is misaligned with divine source, and divine source is her term for God, infinite intelligence, universal supply, whatever name resonates. But her point is that wealth cannot come from fear, because fear contracts and wealth requires expansion, circulation, exchange, giving, receiving, and participation. And circulation is a core element here, because many people want to receive money but are afraid to circulate money, afraid to invest, afraid to give, afraid to risk, afraid to participate, yet demand reward without flow. And Shinn teaches that life operates through flow, not hoarding, because hoarding is scarcity energy, not abundance energy. And what many people call saving is actually hoarding rooted in fear, not strategic stewardship. And that fear-based holding blocks wealth because it signals distrust of supply, distrust of source, and distrust of the future. And the subconscious mind will always create a future that matches what you expect, not what you hope. And this is why Shinn repeatedly emphasized expectation as a spiritual power, because expectation is the emotional posture that determines whether your efforts lead to breakthroughs or breakdowns. And wealthy individuals across cultures tend to share one psychological trait: positive expectation, not unrealistic fantasy, but confident assurance that their actions will lead to gain, their learning will pay off, their network will expand, and their opportunities will multiply. And that expectation influences how they sit in meetings, how they talk about money, how they handle setbacks, and how they approach risk, while those who expect loss often behave tentatively, blame circumstances, retreat from opportunities, or unconsciously self-sabotage when breakthroughs approach, because they do not feel worthy of wealth. And Shinn's remedy for this worthiness issue is spiritual identity. When a person sees themselves not as a victim of circumstances, but as a child of an infinite source, they stop shrinking and start claiming, stop begging and start believing, stop envying and start creating. And this identity shift dissolves comparison, jealousy, and competition, energies that block wealth because they are rooted in fear and unworthiness, and it replaces them with collaboration, generosity, and receptivity, energies that attract wealth because they are rooted in abundance. And this shift is not theoretical. It changes everything from how a person communicates to how they perceive possibility, because the mind cannot perceive what it does not believe exists. So if a person does not believe wealth is available, they will not notice opportunities even when they sit right in front of them. And if they do notice, they will interpret them as threats or scams instead of possibilities. And this explains why two people can enter the same environment and one will find opportunity while the other finds obstacles. The difference is internal programming, not external reality. And internal programming is changeable, which means wealth is learnable. And Shinn's formula teaches exactly how to learn it, through alignment of thought, word, identity, expectation, emotion, and action, all directed toward abundance. And abundance is not greed. It is the natural state of creation. Just look at nature. Everything grows freely. Trees produce more leaves than needed. Seeds multiply beyond their immediate use. Oxygen is abundant. Sunlight is abundant. Ideas are abundant. Yet humans create artificial scarcity through fear, control, belief, and programming. And that programming begins in childhood, is reinforced by culture, and cemented by financial trauma. And Shinn's framework offers a way to dissolve that programming through spiritual practice, psychological awareness, forgiveness of past financial wounds, release of resentment toward wealth, and reconditioning of speech, faith, and identity until the person no longer vibrates in lack. And once lack dissolves, wealth naturally follows, because wealth is not attracted to lack, it is attracted to value, confidence, clarity, and circulation. And Shinn insists that everyone has value, but not everyone recognizes it. And Unrecognized value cannot be monetized, but recognized value becomes service, and service becomes wealth. Florence Scovel Shinn's formula becomes even more powerful when you begin to see wealth not just as money, but as a spiritual response to alignment, because money in her worldview is simply the physical reflection of inner order. And when you study people who consistently attract wealth instead of chasing it, you notice that they have a non-reactive calmness around money, a stable identity that doesn't collapse during temporary financial tightness, a sense of worthiness that does not get negotiated based on bank balances. And this is exactly where Shinn's core principle shows its genius. Wealth begins where fear ends, because fear blocks imagination, blocks prayer, blocks opportunities, blocks relationships, blocks inner voice, and blocks the willingness to take aligned action. And if a person's subconscious is constantly broadcasting fear-based commands like, I must survive, I must not lose, I must play safe, then the universe is compelled to respond with opportunities that match survival, not abundance. And this is why